that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I wanna hope gentle rains can fall upon the land, so lovely earth can stay lovely still. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. We are having another show of Energy Week with George Harvey and Tom Fennell, and we have guests Ned Childs and Clay Turnbull. Wave to the people, Tom. I'll wave too. Okay, so what happens is I do my blog every day, and are you behaving yourself? I do my blog every day looking for news on energy, and I post about 10 or 15 items. And I wind up with good, the news from the week, which I will go through here and we can talk about. I should mention that Ned and Clay are from the New England Coalition on Nuclear Pollution, which is having its
43rd or 44th, depending how you count.
Okay. Annual meeting, and this is happening probably before the first of these shows broadcasts. But keep up with it because it's good stuff. So I'm gonna go straight into the news for the week. And this starts with Friday, September 19th, with the Scottish election. The decision of the Scottish electorate to remain within the UK leaves the way open for a number of projects that are dependent upon UK subsidies to proceed. Independence would have required negotiation on energy with the remainder of the UK, creating market uncertainty. This comes from Wind Power Monthly. And what they're talking about basically is that if the Scots had declared that they wanted independence, then all of these projects that they had would have been up in the air a bit, because the guarantees for those things could have fallen through. So and the British were being kind of nasty to the Scots and saying, we won't buy your power because we don't need it. We're going to build nuclear.
To this article, it says, and they're quoting a publication called Wind Power Intelligence. Scottish capacity makes up over half of the UK's 4.5 gigawatts of onshore wind. And while up until 2020, Scotland has what they call it a pipeline of around 10 gigawatts onshore and 5 gigawatts offshore.
That's
not a pipeline.
But they've got a lot of renewable power. The UK has got a goal. Scotland's goal is 100% by 2020, and the UK is not going to be able to meet its 20% by 2020 if Scotland.
Not without Scotland.
I mean, they were going to be.
England would have taken the Scottish power with an independent Scotland. George. Erin go bra. But,
okay.
I'm half English and half Scottish.
So
I'm
no wonder
divided
you
on
have
the
headaches.
issue. I think the real issue is whether Scotland wants to tell England to take their nuclear power plants and their nuclear submarine fleet out of Scottish waters.
Yeah, well,
because there's no need for nuclear power in Scotland now or ever.
Okay.
Full stop.
You've heard it from the New England Coalition on Nuclear Pollution.
Oh, no.
They might
I
also
don't speak
still
for
have
the coalition. I only speak for myself.
Oh, okay.
But
You've
I am
heard
a
it.
member.
You're a member.
In fact, president.
We won't hold that against you.
Shrinking violet. President.
We will move on. Now, from The Guardian, we have this also on Friday. Ahead of the UN Climate Summit, institutional investors managing 15 trillion pounds, which is approximately $24.6 trillion of assets, are calling on governments to phase out subsidies for fossil fuels. An estimated 370 billion pounds, which is $606 billion worldwide each year, about 5 times the 60 billion pounds paid in renewable subsidies.
Well, George,
a lot of money. What?
That subsidy pales in comparison to the trillion-pound dollar, renminbi, whatever you want to call it, subsidy for nuclear power in the removal of liability insurance requirements.
Yeah, I'm sure it
You
does.
know,
The cost of a reactor meltdown, if treated honestly in the Central Europe, a single reactor melt-through was estimated honestly at 11 trillion
11
euros,
trillion euros.
which is about the annual GNP of the United States. That means going for a year without spending any money. Everybody.
The slight noise that you're hearing in the background there is Chicklet, who is
He's your
a
dog.
She's our cheerleader.
Chicklet is a Chihuahua, and very protective.
With the Chihuahua.
Chicklet
So
is
if
a
you want to
Chihuahua.
talk about subsidies, the Price-Anderson
Yeah.
legislation amounts to trillions of dollars
But
a
they-
year.
They're
but
trying
they-
to turn that into a global insurance pool now. That's
Oh,
how.
of course.
That's how Japan's
How
trying
else
to
would you be
It's
able to
called
do
an
it?
insurance scam.
Okay.
There's
Usually
a
it's called
takeaway
this.
here on this stuff. The international investor community has yesterday, made it clear that the status quo on climate policy is not acceptable. Investors now are taking action on climate change, from direct investment in renewables to company engagement and reducing exposure to carbon risk.
No, it's
So
called
the-
homeowners in South Florida leaving South Florida because they can't afford the flood insurance risk.
Well, this
Gentlemen?
is investors that are
I
talking
think it's
about.
exciting that big business
That's-
is investing in
that's the point.
renewables.
The next one is, according to the CEO of Solar City, within 10 years, every set of solar panels sold by that company will come with a battery backup system, and the energy produced will be less expensive than grid power. So why do you need a nuclear power plant? You don't.
You never did.
Well, okay, but it'll be obvious that you never will in
But
the
the
future.
fact of the matter is, George, everything you thought you'd ever known about nuclear power is probably a lie.
Yes, I knew
Next.
that. Okay, Saturday, September 20th. Oh, I'm sorry, that came from Tree Hugger. Rocky Mountain Institute's micropower database documents the global progress of distributed, rapidly scalable, and no or low carbon generators. Its most astonishing finding, micropower now produces about 1/4 of the world's total electricity.
There you are.
Is
That's
it-
Amory Levins.
There's a
Amory
graph
Levins.
probably up there now
Yeah.
that shows that the red is the total energy, and it's shooting right up there for 25%.
Yeah, and one of the things that you have to remember here is you get a datum from the U.S. government, U.S. DOE, the EIA, Energy Institute, Energy Information Administration, that solar power provides 0.83% of electricity in the United States. But what they don't tell you is that they're only talking about solar that is grid tied and in solar farms that are greater than a megawatt.
So it doesn't count homeowners.
It doesn't count homeowners. It doesn't count, if Jason Cooper puts 1.5 kilowatts up in Putney, it doesn't count that. It doesn't count solar thermal installations, as it just doesn't count any of that stuff. So when they say 0.83% solar, what they really mean is that it's about,
Grid power?
what they really
It's
mean.
a total lie then.
Oh,
They're not giving them
you
any
can't take
indication.
any information from the EIA at face value, and it's not because they're purposely trying to misinform people.
Now,
I
with
don't
the
think.
EIA?
Energy Information Administration, which is part of the DOE.
Or the IAEA? There's the liar for the international
Well,
level.
you can call them liars if you want, but when I tracked it down, it looked to me like the EIA is constrained, whether by policy or law, to do things in a certain way, which will inevitably produce wrong results.
Slant the statistics. It's called propaganda.
Well, all right. Anyway, next item, that was from Forbes. From Clean Technica, French investment banker Kepler Chevreux analysis says $100 billion invested in either wind energy or solar energy and deployed as energy for light or commercial vehicles will produce significantly more energy than the same $100 billion invested in oil.
And the investors are starting to realize this.
Oh, yeah. Well,
They've probably known it for a long time.
yeah. Now, here's good news.
Maybe that's why the price of oil is coming down.
Phan Nguyen Daly says work on Vietnam's first nuclear power plant will not begin at the end of this fiscal year as originally planned. Deputy Trade Minister I'm not even going to bother. My daughter-in-law is Vietnamese, and I have to learn from her how to pronounce Vietnamese, but until that happens. Anyway, he said that Construction was pushed back until 2020 or 2022 to ensure safety precautions.
Hooray for Vietnam.
Yeah.
Finally saying no to nuclear. They're saying it nicely now. Give us another 6 years to really say no. I mean, we had a Vietnamese dinner last night in Harvard Square at Lee's in the garage and had lemongrass chicken, which my wife ordered and shared with me. And we both had a really good deal. Yeah.
Okay.
The downside of this is Vietnam still plans to build 7 other nuclear plants by 2030.
Well, we'll see what
We'll
happens.
see if it happens.
I don't
We'll see
think
if
it's
it
going to
happens.
happen.
I
I don't
think
they're
think it's even
waiting
gonna
to see
happen.
if they can
I
be
would
made.
not bet against you.
But the news item says they're waiting to see if it can be made safe.
Yeah.
That's one of the great lies. There is no safe nuclear power plant, and it should never have been
Okay.
allowed in the first
We're
place.
getting a lot about nuclear today. Sunday, September 21st, from the New York Times, we have an opinion piece called Errors and Emissions. Could fighting global warming be cheap and free? I'm getting caught up in the.
Well,
in the
this is a good one.
Yes, it's a market alternative. It's a succession in the capitalist system.
Two
from oil,
reports-
coal, and nuclear
Yeah,
to
two
solar.
reports both claim strong measures to limit carbon emissions would have hardly any negative effect on economic growth and might lead to even faster growth. But would anybody believe the good news? I've got a couple of people here who will.
In Germany, look to Germany.
Yes.
They said no to nuclear against the protest of the handlers in this country, and they were outraged. I wanted to put a knife through the car radio when I heard that commentator. I was so angry.
I'm glad you didn't think about putting the knife through anything that was
I
alive.
was on the way to a field trip down
Okay.
in Connecticut.
Well, the takeaway on this one here is putting a price on carbon would have very large co-benefits.
Right.
Positive effects over and above the reduction
go.
in climate
Yeah,
risk.
just think
Clearly
about
the way we can pay off the national debt for one thing.
Well, they're talking here significant reductions in what we're paying for public health.
Yeah.
Right.
Public health benefits.
Public health.
Yeah, but they don't
We're
want to talk
talking about
public
$1 trillion
health.
a year for public health.
No, they just want to put a bunch of paint on cancer babies and act like they're doing something. The
Okay.
real way to get rid of cancer is to ban nuclear power. Just saying.
Next from the Energy Collective. Last month was the warmest August since records began being kept in 1880, according to NOAA. They also projected out scenarios for the rest of the year, making clear that 2014 is going to be one of the very hottest years on record, possibly the hottest ever.
But
We
we
don't-
saw
we can't
that,
tell that,
we
yeah.
saw that picture last week that's up on the screen
Yes.
on our very right. It
Yes.
was orange, not pink. It's the same picture. Everything red in that picture is above normal.
But we've been
Worldwide.
below normal, yeah. Except in
Yes,
the central
right.
North America, central eastern North America, it's been a cooler
There
anomaly
have been a
this
couple
year.
of places,
This-
and you know,
this
it's
summer.
kind of fueled
And last winter.
the people who are saying it isn't happening.
We had the polar vortex, exactly.
There's no
There's-
such thing as global warming. We still have winter.
This
Yeah.
is true, and a lot of people would question
Okay.
the debate.
Daily Mail. A march in London today to demand urgent action on climate change is one of 2,000 events. Actually, it turned out to be more like 2,500. I saw the actual number, but it was well above 2,000. Taking place in 150 countries around the world ahead of the United Nations Climate Summit next week. Now that is last Monday because this happened. This was on Sunday. Some 100,000 people are expected to get involved in New York City.
But it
Now,
turned out to be about 400.
yeah, it turned out to be about 4 times that. But that's what happens with these things. You know, I mean, Ned will tell you about what happened after the Fukushima disaster. That, you know, in Tokyo, they had people marching every week.
I think they may still have weekly
I think they do.
demonstrations, but I don't think it's
You
covered.
don't hear it reported.
No.
And in those days, you'd hear one organization. Of course, this is in an area where people are talk about freedom of speech, and it's there. And in the United States, we have freedom of speech, and that means that one publication will say there's 10,000 people, and another publication will say that there's 100,000 people.
By the way, if you want, this particular article that you quoted,
Mm-hmm.
that you linked to, is just loaded with pictures.
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
it's just, there's 100 pictures there.
Oh yes.
That's the good news. The bad news is actress Emma Thompson is in half of them.
Why is that bad news?
No, it really isn't.
Let me
Okay.
tell
It's just
you.
kind of funny, 'cause
let me
she's
give
all
you
over the
one quote from Joseph Goebbels,
Uh-oh.
who died in 1945 in Berlin. He said, "Give me the media, the mass media, and I can turn any country into a nation of pigs."
Now,
can borrow from
you
that.
speak German.
Yeah, hold on.
I want you to tell him, just pronounce the name Mecklenburg-Vorpommern.
Mecklenburg-Vorpommern.
Okay, that's how it's
Vorpommern.
supposed to be said.
Vorpommern.
All right.
He gets it right every time. I get it
Mecklenburg.
a little bit toward right. Okay. Now, this is an important one that's coming up. On the eve of the UN Climate Summit, Desmond Tutu argues that tactics used against firms who did business with South Africa must now be applied to fossil fuels to prevent human suffering.
I couldn't link to this.
Say that again.
unfortunately.
Say that
it
again.
I'll read it again. On the eve of the UN Climate Summit, remember, this was
Right.
something that was in the news on Sunday, the day before the
climate
all
march.
of this was the climate march. Desmond Tutu argues that tactics used against firms who did business with South Africa
Divestment, right.
must now be applied to the fossil fuel industry to prevent human suffering. And he isn't even talking about what happens in the
But he was,
environment.
if he said that last Saturday, the answer from yesterday was the Rockefeller Brothers Fund divesting of their $840 million
I think that's
fund
just the
from fossil
that's the
fuels.
tip of the
But
iceberg.
hello, they did respond to
They
Tutu
did
then.
indeed. They did
And so
indeed.
that becomes the debate. And is it, again, something that no one's going to be allowed to talk about? Look over here. There's a football.
Well, they try to do
Fumble.
that. They try to do that. Monday, September 22nd, Renew Economy.
Fumble. Oh, sorry.
In the past few years, to the surprise of many, both China and the United States have taken major steps away from coal. This opens up a crucial window of opportunity to achieve what many thought was a lost cause, a peak in global emissions of heat-trapping gases well before 2020. That from Renew Economy.
There's a picture of that one up on the screen now.
Yeah, and this is something, you know,
There you go.
Ned will
yeah.
sit there and talk about nuclear, and we talk about coal, and he'll turn it into nuclear. The two
joined
of
at
them,
the hip.
they're joined at the hip. I absolutely agree. You can't do nuclear without huge amounts of money, and to a certain extent, you could make the claim that the coal supplied that money.
Yes.
And they were never in competition with each other. They were always the same organizations using the same business
Either
plans
or
to
both.
do the work, and they, you know.
That's right.
But now what's happening is, as coal becomes too difficult to use, nuclear is getting too expensive to use. The whole thing is
Apart from any health aspects.
apart from any health aspects, of course.
Well, that graph, it really says it quite well. If you look at the way that graph is aiming up to the corner, that's what will happen if we do nothing.
Yes.
And if we implement all the suggestions that were talked about in this article, we have reached the peak and we're going back down the other way.
Right.
And that's what we got to do.
Right.
And the quicker the better.
And the quicker
for the
the
children
better.
of China.
Well, not
Whether
just
it be
the children of
actinides
China, but
or coal.
This goes
smog.
out to 2020.
yeah, this is children all over the world. Okay, next from Pensacola News Journal. With the UN Climate Summit coming up, major companies, including Big Oil, will make pledges to help fight global warming by cutting their heat-trapping carbon dioxide emissions, protecting the world's forests, and reducing methane leakage from fossil fuel production. Well, Big Oil doing that is, I still want to see it happen.
It'll happen, but it'll be public relations.
It'll be public relations, at least initially. I think there are a few oil companies, Shell being one, possibly BP being another, that actually are already working on this.
The reality is economics will win.
Economics will win, and we're getting into a position where renewable power is getting to be so inexpensive that the oil industry, the coal industry, the nuclear industry are all getting to be in trouble. And
As
they
far as
don't.
the
They're in trouble because investment dollars are going toward the renewables.
Bingo.
That's right.
That's just
That's
exactly
right.
what.
But you know, Clay, one of the things that is just mind-boggling. Well, we'll get into this.
But no, look to Germany for the pressures that because they are asking for rate relief
What
for
is
their coal-fired generating plants.
What is the magazine in Germany that's so upset about nuclear being shut down? And Spiegel or Stern or
There are lots of voices from the dark side. They're well represented.
You have heard it here, folks. The emperor is not yet dead.
No, but it's about a succession, really. Think about it. In life, in history,
I'm all right.
from one emperor to the next, from one dictator to the next, from one king to the next, things change. And vested interests no longer are vested when their man dies. That's why they struggle to keep him alive.
Yeah.
And Rome invented royal adoption, but coal
Rome
is dying a
invented
hard death,
royal
just
adoption.
as nuclear
Can
is
I
dying a
quote
hard
you at
death.
that?
Yeah.
Rome invented. You know, one of the things that I keep coming to, people say, how can humanity improve? Because it just, and I go back to Rome and I talk about what things were like in Rome,
Right.
where they calculated, their economists calculated that when you get a slave, the thing to do with that slave is don't feed him well, don't give him medicine, don't treat him. Run him to death in 7 years. That's what they said. And you had a system where, the paterfamilia, who could be 98 years old and senile and hates his great-granddaughter's husband, so when the great-granddaughter has a baby, he says that baby's not a member of the family.
Right.
And the babies who were rejected by the paterfamilia were literally thrown out with the trash.
Yeah, on the fire.
No, they were thrown
Put
out.
it on the fire.
They were thrown out on the trash,
Yeah.
and they had people who spent their lives going up and down the streets looking for cast-out babies that they could turn into slaves.
Oh, wow.
I think we're in a better society than that today. But
Slightly.
we've got a long ways to go, and I think we can do it. It's just a matter of trying to work on it. Okay,
Seeing the light.
yes.
Waking up.
Tuesday, September 23rd, at the United Nations Climate Summit, which begins today, that is to say Tuesday, the European Commission will formally recommend a 40% cut in heat-trapping greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 for its 28 member countries, its president said on Monday. Now, the United States, China, and India need to step up. That from the Tribune Review. Also the same day, from ABC Online, that is not American Broadcast Company, that's a company, that's Australian Broadcast Company. Australia's federal government says coal will serve as an affordable, dependable energy source for decades to come. But the UN's climate chief has questioned whether that is in Australia's best interest long term and says that coal has no future in the world's energy mix. And guess what, gang? Coal isn't alone there.
Coal and nuclear are going down. And they were never needed.
They're going down.
They were
They're
never
going
needed.
down.
This is an
Peabody's coal
interesting
train.
aside that ties in with what I was saying a little bit earlier.
What's that?
The World Bank study found that air pollution kills 750,000 people every year in China alone.
In China alone.
That's about 20% more than the population of Vermont.
Yeah, and in addition to that, they're saying 3.5 million people, and that's actually it's 7 million people from air pollution worldwide, but half of that is indoor, and it's hard.
This is 750,000
Right.
people in China alone.
In China alone, but the 7 million people die from air pollution worldwide, and a lot of that is people who live in very poor areas who are doing their cooking
In
with
the house,
unvented,
no windows. Yeah,
unvented
But you see, that
fires.
statistic has always been used by the nuclear power industry as a reason to have nuclear power because of the air pollution from coal. And it was a false choice.
Well,
we didn't need either.
If that was
And
the
it doesn't
case, why
save you
didn't
from
Entergy
coal.
close its coal burning plants? I mean, this is really kind of disingenuous when you think about it.
Disingenuous.
Okay.
But it's also about the vested interests wanting to maintain control.
Of course it is.
Of course.
So we're talking about a succession.
And this is not capitalism versus socialism.
No.
It's both of those, which are fundamentally
The
identical
question is,
in
can we
some
wake
respects.
up and realize we need, because I think the point is that the EU set a goal good for them, but they're underselling what is possible. I think Makajani produced
by
numbers
far.
that said by 2030
By far.
we could be 90% grid power
Yes.
from renewables.
Absolutely.
And wind up the
And
coal industries
if
and
you-
the nuclear, the uranium
The
industries.
people to pay attention to on this are the financial people who are seeing this company coming, and they're saying you want to invest your money wisely. These are certain areas to avoid: nuclear, coal, oil, because the rest of this stuff, when they're saying,
Well, then you could say recommend shorting stocks in
yeah,
those
well,
companies.
I don't know about shorting,
financial.
but what they're saying basically is Barclays downgraded the bonds of all U.S. utilities, and the reason is because by 2017, the portion of the U.S. population that's going to save money by ditching the grid and using solar and battery backups is huge.
Or at least the forward-thinking utility could get into those markets.
Green
and
Mountain
get
Power
it.
being
Yes,
one of them.
There you are.
Yeah,
That's the way forward.
you know, basically what happens is when you've got that kind of stress being placed on a company that has a nuclear power plant or a coal, but it doesn't matter. They're put into a position where they have to spend. How much did it cost to refuel Vermont Yankee the last time it was refueled?
Well, it's lots of money to refuel, but they have security costs they can't walk away from, whereas
Yeah, I
you
know
don't
that.
have to have any cost
But-
of security costs.
I think it was closer to 100.
You mean just the fuel cost?
Just
Forget the
the
security.
cost of just doing what they were doing.
That's right. Even though the fuel cost is low compared to coal, it's not low compared to solar or wind.
Solar.
Bingo.
How much do you pay for fuel for solar panels?
Zero. Forever.
Where
Till the
is?
sun winks out.
Yeah, till the sun winks out. How long do solar panels last? The-
40 years or more,
the
we don't really
indication-
know.
Yeah, exactly. The stuff that who was it who mounted those solar panels on the solar cells on the Vanguard? That was you know who was it?
Richard Gottlieb.
Richard Gottlieb.
Yeah.
Richard Gottlieb, whose wife was on our show. You know,
She's on our board. Carol Levin.
Carol
Just
Levin,
had her hip
wonderful,
replaced.
wonderful woman, and Richard was just a wonderful guy. It was just, and he was so human. You know, he was such a presence in Brattleboro.
Yes.
He was the person who mounted the solar cells on the Vanguard-powered satellites that went up into space, the first ones, and the oldest solar panels that went into space are still functioning.
They're still functioning.
So how
Oh,
long?
it'll never work.
But you know, I mean, we have no reason to believe that a solar cell is going to be not operating 100 years hence.
So Edison, we talked about this earlier.
Yeah.
Edison recommended solar for the grid power
Yeah.
in the 1900s.
Yeah.
And then Truman recommended it in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And then people widely recommended it in the 70s, even Alvin Weinberg.
Jimmy Carter was
the
behind it.
Weinberg is quoted in the Nader book on the nuclear menace, and the preface of the book is saying if solar can come down to 2.5 times the price of coal, then it would be a better way to go for the grid than nuclear power.
Well,
in 1974,
and
he said this.
what is solar compared
and he
to coal
directed
now?
Oak Ridge. He was a director of Oak Ridge National Labs.
How much is solar compared to coal now?
I think it's below 2.5 times more expensive.
I
It's
got
probably
news.
at parity.
I got you news
parity.
for you. It's below parity
Below parity.
compared
It's
to
cheaper
coal.
than coal?
Price of coal has gone up because we've finally started telling the people who are burning coal, you've got to stop polluting the air because the mercury is dropping into the streams in Vermont and making it impossible to eat the fish safely. So you've got to stop that. And when they stop that, the price of coal goes up so that it's similar to the price of nuclear. And meantime, you know, the average power purchase agreement in 2013 nationwide in the United States for wind was 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour.
For solar.
2.5 cents. Well, for solar it was more. It was more like 5 cents.
So what was the 2.5? Was
Wind.
coal?
For wind.
Oh, wind. Yeah.
And coal was like 9.
Yeah.
I mean, these technologies, the old technologies, are not competitive anymore. And the idea of
Even with the unlimited subsidies.
the Hinkley power plant, they're talking about
20 cents?
$27 billion to build 2 reactors.
Insanity.
And another almost $2 billion just to connect them to the grid.
That was as insane as pursuing the invasion of Turkey at Gallipoli.
It's the same people, you know.
The British have a problem.
The British,
They need to get more Scottish.
There's an old metalworkers saying, gunsmith saying actually, it keeps coming back to me. Where, you know, a gunsmith told me this once. He said the saying is, give an Englishman a piece of steel and he'll do something silly with it. Anyway.
But the trouble is, we're all Englishmen.
Well,
doomed to our fate.
No, that's not true.
yourself.
That's not true. That's not true. And every person in the United States, legal, illegal, alien, whatever, every single person in the United States has an unwritten but nevertheless fundamental right to be 100% Irish on St. Patrick's Day.
There you go. But we've also given our rights over to the corporations.
Well,
then they can
what can I
use them
say?
against us.
Okay. Google's controversial decision to fund the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, was a mistake, company chairman Eric Schmidt admitted on Monday, saying the group, that is to say ALEC, is spreading lies. This is an interesting
That's
idea.
pretty strong language.
Spreading lies about global warming and, quote, making the world a much worse place, end quote. This comes from Think Progress. The first thing that hit my mind when I read that was, I wonder if they're going to sue him for slander. And then I thought,
Slander's got to be false, doesn't it?
probably a bad idea, because he might be able to prove that they're spreading lies and know that they're doing it. Yeah, and if that happens, I think Alec is better off just kind of ignoring this one and hoping it'll go away, which it never will, because they'll have more people doing the same thing in the near future. Okay, in a highly symbolic gesture with a real bottom line, the Rockefeller family, whose fortune came from oil, has announced that its $860 million philanthropic organization will sell off its assets linked to fossil fuel companies and invest in renewable power. This from 3BL Media. That is an interesting...
Well, it's more ironic.
See, there's another
because
oil subsidy for solar.
Well,
All that money came from oil.
All the money,
That's what I was
but
gonna
you know,
say.
this is
That's
the
where they got their
Norwegians.
money.
The Norwegians had the state retirement fund in Norway. They got the money in the fund from oil, and they're investing the money in renewables, which makes sense. I mean, when one technology becomes obsolete, archaic. And that includes, you know, I think a lot of people have to make this mind shift on nuclear power that it is not the wave of the future. I came from a generation where we watched television and we saw Disney doing our friend
Mousetrap with the German accented fellow. The Germans are German. See, if we have these mousetraps and we let the ping pong ball and there's 2 and then 4 and 16 chain reaction. We'll save the world.
And that was really an impressive thing. You know, they did that.
Magic.
They had that. It must have been a gymnasium or something that was just full of mousetraps, and they had ping pong balls, and you pitch one little ping pong ball in, and then you see 2, 4, and then the whole place is full of ping pong balls.
That's a
Flying
darker,
around.
deeper story how Disney did the propaganda
Well,
for
if
nuclear
you
power.
watch
They
that
invested
film-
in his theme park.
If you watch that cartoon or that release of the Disneyland or whatever, Disney World,
this is engineer.
they were talking about putting radioactive materials into crops in order to be able to track where the nutritional stuff was going, so that when you went to the doctor, the doctor could look at you and say, "Well, you're glowing."
They were going to build nuclear-powered airplanes.
Yeah, they were
They
going
were
to
going to
have
build 1,000
nuclear-powered.
reactors, 400 plutonium breeders,
Oh, man.
and 600 uranium-fired reactors by
Okay.
the year 2000.
Okay.
That was gospel for 20 years.
Yeah. Okay. Wednesday, September 24th, this is yesterday, David Cameron announced at the Climate Summit that shale gas is a part of Britain's solution to the tackling climate change. Friends of the Earth, however, slammed Mr. Cameron's speech, saying that promoting fracking at the Climate Summit is, quote,
This is a good one.
Like trying to sell cigarettes at a hospital, end quote.
Well,
That
you
for
know,
energy
There was a
news-
time.
Yeah.
There was a time.
There was a time, there
Yeah.
was.
what,
Energy
when they'd
News
sell
Live.
cigarettes at hospitals?
Yeah,
Well, all the
absolutely.
ads selling cigarettes.
No, but I mean,
Featured guys
the
dressed as
point is
Batman.
that the scientific claim that burning gas loads half the carbon in the atmosphere as opposed to the same BTUs from coal. Gas is less carbon intensive.
But they just completely ignore the amount of methane that's left into the
I
let
think
into
that's
the
the
atmosphere.
great
and
secret we don't know
whole
about.
bunch of
What
stuff.
amounts of methane are released from the fracking that are never recovered in
There
the
have been
pipeline?
scientific
It's
reports
known,
on
but
that.
we don't know it.
Well,
Is
some
it-
of them have
is
been
it-
released.
Is it as
And it's-
much as released as
They
is
say
recovered?
that fracking gas is as bad as coal. It's just that simple.
In terms of the carbon loading.
In terms of in terms of greenhouse
But
gas.
since it's
Greenhouse
there,
gas.
they're going to go get it. The U.S. is headlong into gas.
Well, we're going to get out of that, I think, in the not very
But are
distant
we, and
future.
what
It's
about
a
the
bubble.
tar sands? Are we going
It's
to
a bubble.
stop
It's a
mining the
bubble.
tar sands?
Ned, it costs $2 a gallon to get bitumen out of the ground.
Right, so you need $90 a barrel oil.
No,
Once we,
it's going to
Yeah,
be more
you're
than
still
gonna
90.
have
I
an
think
oil
it
market
would be
for
more like
transportation.
120. I just can't see how that stuff can come to
I don't
market.
think people realize we could actually replace, because there's really two separate discussions. The grid power
Yep.
is clearly replaceable by wind and
Yes,
solar.
yes.
But that's only a third of our primary energy burn.
But we can
So
we can replace
transportation
the
is another
EV.
third.
Absolutely.
And a lot of
Electric
that will
cars.
stay
And
oil.
on top of everything else, we've got heat pumps. We can switch to
Right.
an electric economy which has no nuclear,
and
no coal.
hydrogen for the long haul transport.
We've
And
got
you could
every
replace it in the,
we've got every
in the heating sector is the third
technology we need to deal with
To get
giving
off
us-
fossil fuels
to get
or
off fossil fuels, nuclear, and
Coal,
clean up
oil,
our
and
atmosphere.
nuclear. That's
We've got
Mark
everything we
Donnie's
need.
book.
I think
Everything.
one of the more common responses to a statement like we can switch to solar and wind is, well, what do you do at night? And nuclear provides base load power. And
We'll get to
Nuclear
that, Clay.
for batteries.
Let me finish this, and then we'll get to that.
nuclear
Okay.
does provide base load power, but so what?
It's not
Base
the only
load
way.
power is so archaic.
Right. I mean,
Baseload power
it's a
is
false
a
argument.
terrible match to grid demand.
Right.
It's a terrible match to grid demand. You're far better off having power plants you can shut off at night when nobody wants the power.
It's another way to lie about the numbers.
It is.
Make them lie for you.
That's right. Okay, now this is one that I find really interesting. This is from scoop.co.nz, which will tell you right off the
New Zealand?
that it's from New Zealand. In New Zealand, the chief executive of the country's Petroleum Exploration and Production Association told Radio New Zealand this morning, this being Wednesday morning, that his industry is ready and willing to adapt to, quote, the transition that we know will ultimately occur, end quote, and this leaves political climate change deniers out in the cold.
Right. But only in New Zealand.
No, well, it's coming in the United States. I have
You think
no
the
doubt.
Koch brothers will get the message?
The Koch brothers are going to go broke at some point. And the reason is because they're heavily invested in an industry that's operating at the cusp of a bubble.
But George, beware the dying kick of the beast.
Oh, I know that one. Yeah. Next, from news.gnom.es, which
Oh,
I
that's
would
a good one.
assume comes...
News Dome.
Yeah. An alliance of 4 companies say they have found an answer to the energy storage problem in an underground salt formation. There you go, Clay. The group proposes an $8 billion power project, and believe me, these guys could do that. They could pull this off. That would store power from a huge wind farm in Wyoming and deliver it to over 1 million households in Southern California. And what they're doing here, I wrote an article for
Yeah.
Green Energy Times on this yesterday. What they're doing is they're talking about putting up a wind farm in Wyoming that will produce 2.1 megawatts of power. Gigawatts, you're right. Sorry.
Two nuclear.
2,100 megawatts.
Yeah.
Basically 2 nuclear power plants when they're really going full tilt.
Right, 2 big ones.
That power is then moved to Utah, and there's a reason for that. because they've got a salt dome in Utah. They've got these all over the country, but there aren't. As far, I don't know of any in
They
New
even
England.
have one near Carlsbad, New Mexico.
Yeah, they had that one that collapsed in Louisiana.
Bayou Corn.
Bayou Corn, that's right.
Partially collapsed.
Partially collapsed.
It's about half the size
It's
of
like a
Putney.
cooling tower. Partially.
Yeah, unfortunately.
That was the Napoleonville salt dome.
That's right.
The revenge of the French.
Yes, that's right. But what they're doing is they're shipping the power to this salt dome where they've got 4 huge caverns. Each cavern is a quarter of a mile tall and about 270 feet wide. So these things are huge.
Voids.
They're big voids. They're just bottles that have one pipe leading out of the top, and that's about it. And they are planning on super compressing air, piping it down into those things and storing it in there. Then as the power is needed, the air will come out.
So it's not a thermal concept at all. It's just
No,
pressure.
there's nothing thermal
pressure.
at all. And what happens is as the power is needed, it is shipped to, in this case, Los Angeles.
Wow.
On transmission lines that already exist from Utah to Los Angeles. It's going to cost about $2 billion, a little bit more, to get the lines in from Wyoming to Utah.
Los Angeles.
The power in Utah
it's already there.
is going to cost about $1.5 billion to store 60,000 megawatt hours of electricity. And I hit that number and I thought, this is mind-blowing. 60,000 megawatt hours.
With pressure.
We're talking about storage here. You know, when you think about storing electrical power,
Yeah.
you have to think about, a car battery stores less than 1 kilowatt hour, which you could buy for 15 cents. But the battery costs about $60 or
Or
something.
$100 for a good one.
Yeah. What they've been saying, and car batteries are not good for storing grid power because they won't last long enough.
Right.
But the really good batteries, when they're saying when the price of these batteries, when the price of grid storage goes below $200 per kilowatt hour, it's going to be transformative. And these guys are talking about taking it to 25 cents at $25.
Wow.
This is just mind blowing. They're talking about $8 billion to develop a system that will deliver 1.2 megawatts to Los Angeles continuously. This is continuous.
From these pressurized salt dome voids.
Yeah.
But is there a risk of fracture of the salt dome and leakage of the
I'm
air?
a little leery
Has
about
it been
that.
proved?
I don't
concept?
know, but I was telling Tom before we got into this. There's a pilot plant going in the UK right now. They're testing this, where they use excess power when they've got it to compress air to a point where it's really, really, really highly under pressure, and then they extract the heat from it, which of course they use to heat a building or something like that. And then when they do that, it cools off in there enough that under that amount of pressure, the nitrogen drops out as a liquid. So they throw the oxygen away, which is relatively safe to let into the air, and the argon goes away. And then they've got a big bottle of liquid nitrogen. Now, when you want the power, you use that bottle. You just boil the nitrogen that's in there to drive a turbine, and you can let the nitrogen go because that belongs in the atmosphere anyway. And when you drive the turbine, of course, the boiling of the nitrogen is going to cool things off, so you can use that to cool someplace where you need an air conditioner, refrigerator, or whatever. So
This is the process?
This is the process. So they've got, you've heard of combined heat and power. This is combined heat, cooling, and power.
Yeah.
And
Which is also geothermal. Geothermal is the same machine run in the other direction.
That's right.
You can heat and cool with the same furnace.
This system is a system that, we don't have salt domes in New England, but we could run a system like this in New England. So I'm waiting to see what happens in terms of the pilot program.
Brilliant.
The next one, and this is the last item for the news. This came from Clean Technica. Major news analysis produced by Australia's Climate Works, along with Australian National University, shows that 15 of the world's biggest economies can move to, quote, net carbon zero, end quote, by 2050.
Well,
They
I
can
think
do it faster
Makajani
than that.
said we could do it by 2030,
I
and
think-
I don't
I
think
believe-
he's been disproved.
I think Makajani is actually closer to what will happen.
It's just a question of the political will.
Well, no. You know what it is, Ned? It's a question of what happens when the people who are lying about this suddenly get to the point where they realize they can't lie anymore because everybody knows they're not telling the truth.
The Galileo moment.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, there was a thing that it came out from the what is the name of that Nathan Hale Institute,
Ethan Allen.
Ethan Allen Institute. Guy was writing about now it's time. Now it's time to stop life support for big wind. And I read that and I thought, what in the world is this guy talking about?
He's trying to
we aren't giving any
go
support to
backwards.
big wind. And what is big wind?
Right.
Well, there's the production credit, isn't there?
Well, there was tax credit.
There was a
some
tax credit, but it's disappeared at the end of 2013.
But there is no subsidiarity on the basic liability of the process, such as the Price Anderson.
Well, a wind tower might fall over and crush a cow or something like
Well,
that.
they can carry liability for that. No, you can
You know-
successfully insure wind power.
Absolutely, you
or
can do
solar
that.
power.
Yeah, and-
you
and
can't successfully insure nuclear power.
Well, that's why we've got Price Anderson, because we need to insure it.
because there would have been no nuclear power industry
Bingo.
without it.
Right, exactly. And the fact of the matter is, Ned, you can't, or they haven't successfully insured coal either, because
Well, that's just it.
They're
The
dumping mercury into
Coal
the.
has been, it's a question of the global commons. Now think of that. We always thought the commons is where everybody could go take their cow, and pretty soon everyone's got their cow. Now there's no more useful grass in the commons. It was always a local issue. And the environmental movement started, let's say, in 1970 at Earth Day. It was about the river flowing through Cleveland or the smog in LA. Now 40 years on, and then we realize that it's one atmosphere, it's one hydrosphere, and the pollution in the ocean of Japan will wind up in the waters of Australia someday, soon enough. And there
Too soon.
is only one atmosphere. It's a question of the global commons, and the coal has been given a pass to pollute the global commons because up to some level of pollution, the planet does clean itself. The coal smog
In
washes
some
out.
respects,
And
in
the
other
plants
respects,
can
no.
handle it. But when you go too far,
Consider
you tip
the
balance.
waterways and the ponds in lakes in Vermont. There are places where you can go out in the countryside and you can find a pristine looking stream. But before you fish in it, you'd better go to the Vermont fisheries and find out what that stream's level of mercury pollution is.
I think it basically is totally widespread. You don't eat a lot of fish caught in local waters.
Well, there are
Bingo.
certain
especially
fish.
if you're a pregnant
Absolutely.
mother.
Right. There are certain fish in Vermont that you can trust, and there are other fish that you can't. And a lot of it,
Other fish you
Sir-
can't eat.
yeah, and
Okay.
and a lot of this is a matter of what's the species, and a lot of it is a matter of what water did you take it out of.
Well, and a lot of it gets to the issue of biomagnification, bioconcentration, which Tom was
Exactly.
bringing in.
And what's happened here is that the coal industry has been, and basically the coal industry that's done it, has been dumping this stuff.
There's mercury.
And the thing that I liken it to is
Into our
you've got a
atmosphere.
next door neighbor who's dumping his trash in your backyard. What are you going to do about it? You call the police if he won't clean it up. You
Right.
bring a lawsuit. What are we going to do with the coal industry? They can't get the mercury out of the water. There isn't any technology to do it.
couldn't you bring about a clean coal product with very low emissions if you simply raised the carbon tax on the
Oh,
other?
I have no doubt that that would happen.
So that you could actually make
they've
a
got the
clean
coal
coal
gasification.
distillate
Yes,
competitive.
they've got the clean, the coal gas, which is what they used to do, and you can scrub that
You
gas.
can make a distillate too,
But
a
of
very
course,
clean burning
one of
diesel.
one of the problems with that is, I'm not sure that that would be cheaper than wood gas. In fact,
Right.
I think it would probably be more. So the
But
next.
there are certain market manipulations, and you can phase out. The point is to wake up to the problems at hand and begin to phase out. The point is when you're on a binge to find a bottom, and
Yeah.
then start talking truthfully
However,
about
right
where
now,
you're at.
the point we are right now is a point at which the thing that we have to be truthful about is, right now, is solar cheaper? Is wind cheaper? Is coal cheaper? Is nuclear cheaper? I'm sorry. You could take that Hinkley plant and you could replace the whole thing with solar power in the UK.
That's exactly
and
right.
And you could do it cheaper. You could do it faster.
With no risk.
And you could do it with no risk. Why are they doing it with nuclear?
It's a total scam.
Why are they?
It's an insurance scam.
Honestly, I think it's because they haven't come to the point of realizing that it's even possible.
Well, you got to figure
No.
out who's making money from it.
Well, that's true. Absolutely.
It's a scam. It's an insurance scam to prop up the worldwide uranium cartel. And you look at Rio
Again,
Tinto
who's making money on it?
mining uranium in
I don't
Africa,
have any uranium stock.
Canada.
I bet you don't.
Australia, United States. It
However-
tends to be British crown money and the
What-
prerogatives of British Empire.
What is happening now is that organizations like UBS, Morgan Stanley, Barclays, which is British,
Calling a spade a spade.
they're saying, "Oh, wait a minute, this is too expensive.
Right.
We can deal with the risks of, we can deal with the risks of solar power.
Right.
We can deal with the risks of
And
wind power.
the nuclear scam, sad as it may be for the uranium supporters to realize it and admit it, is less jobs intensive than renewables.
Much.
That's true too.
And
Yeah.
so it's not even a good investment for the working man.
It's not
The
a good
fact that you're
investment for
giving him
anybody.
this cancer.
It's not a good investment for
It was
anybody.
never necessary. Everything, just about everything you thought you ever knew about uranium fission power, nuclear power, is probably a lie.
Well, think
That
about it this
lovely
way.
to
Think about it
consider.
this way. I went to an engineer at Vermont Yankee, and I said, "How efficient is your plant?"
About 36%
Well,
thermal.
the thing that I've read recently is 32%, but he said about 35. He said, "I don't know offhand, but those plants are all about the same. They're all about 35%."
The Fort St. Vrain, which was the liquid sodium plant, was about 40%.
Okay,
It was more,
so
and coal
this
was
is
about
what he
33.
said.
What is coal?
This is what he said.
Coal is about 33.
Yeah, this is what he said, about 35%. I said, I'm gonna tell you that you're wrong. And of course, the first thing that he did was say, "Ha ha, who are you?" He didn't say that, but he acted like, okay, this is a comic thing that's about to happen. And he said, "Well, what do you think it is?" I said, "It's under 1%.
That's
And
right.
he said,
But the fuel cost
he said,
and the enrichment.
"Where do you get that?" And I said, "You're only using about 2.5% of the fuel that
energy
you've got,
in the
and
fuel pins.
exactly,
That's
and
right.
that stuff you're only getting 32% efficiency out of. This is less than 1%." And he said, "Well, if you want to look at it that way, you're right."
You're right. Well, I know.
Now here's the problem, Ned. What is it that you're losing by operating at less than 1% efficiency? And
You're
the
losing-
answer to that is you're losing the ability to deal with 99% of the waste. The reason why nuclear power is such a problem is partly because the reactor can melt down. We've had 12 meltdowns worldwide.
Or more.
Well, we've had 12 that we know of in commercial grid-tied nuclear
Okay.
power plants. Okay, and I can actually name them for
Okay.
you. And I will admit, one of them, the fuel rods melted, the cladding decomposed, granules of fuel wound up on the reactor floor, but the granules of fuel didn't actually melt themselves. I count it as a meltdown. If you want to count that not as a meltdown, I'll say, okay, there were only 11.
There was fuel damage.
There was fuel damage. And this is out of 480 plants that have come online, so 2.5% of all of our nuclear plants have melted down.
So far.
But ignore that. The problem that we've got is that we've got a huge amount of waste.
That's right.
And the waste is concentrated, fortunately, not dumped all over North America or the world, at least
Wow.
not much of it. I mean, the 200 pounds of plutonium that went into the Irish Sea bothers me a little bit. But, and the fact that the U.S. dropped a few 55-gallon drums of nuclear waste into the Pacific Ocean bothers me a little bit. But, we're at a
More than a few.
more than
Thousand.
a few. Yeah, well, a thousand's a few. I mean, just think about the fact that we got billions of people on this world. That's only one barrel
And we
for
have
a
not
million
been-
people.
They have not been honest about the amount of actinides and fission products that were released
We have
from
got
Fukushima.
no way of knowing. Oh, Fukushima, we do know that there was spent fuel found a mile and a half from the plant.
How'd it
Well, I
get
think
there?
the most
Birds?
recent news
I was carried by chipmunks, I think.
indicates many hundreds of kilograms of other fission products were
Well,
released.
you know, you heard this.
Hundreds of kilograms.
That was from an NRC conference call, where Ray Shatta said, "Well, where did that come from? If the spent fuel pools worked so perfectly, where did the?" And they said, "Oh, that didn't come from the spent fuel pools.
It might have been the equipment pool. That's just it. There's another pool on the way to the spent fuel pool from the reactor unloading deck. There's an equipment pool where they store the shroud, and those can go.
Why would that
So
have
they can
blown
s-
up
they can s-
and thrown fuel a mile and a half? Do you have any idea
But we're
how
not sure
fast?
that the reactor 3 did not go. Did not
It's
reject
the
its
only
entire
explanation I can come to is that reactor 3 blew up.
loading when X-Fest.
That thing, if you look at it, it created a vertical column of smoke, of black smoke, straight up.
gases and fission products.
And so after that, they find fuel a mile and a half from the plant, which had too much, they said it had too much radioactive iodine in it not to have been ejected from a critical mass. And this
core.
is from the U.S. nuclear,
Right.
the NRC.
And that was about the same time that the USS Reagan sailed into the plume.
Oh, those poor guys.
But
Anyway, we have to stop.
Stop.
We have to stop here because I think we've used up our hour.
I think we've gone over it.
We've
No,
got-
I think
I
we
think we're
were
at
delayed.
55 minutes.
Yeah,
We were
started late.
delayed
We're at
very late.
55 minutes.
So,
But I might want to go feed my meter.
okay.
Take
Well,
a break.
why don't you do that, and
Yeah.
then we can start up again and go a little bit longer.
All right.
So we will say goodbye, and hopefully this is completing an hour. If not, then Roland, please edit a few words, and
He'll figure it out.
he'll figure it
Yeah,
out.
he's
Roland
good at
does.
that.
He's
Yeah.
good, and we will continue.
Goodbye, people.
Bye, people. I think we're going to have more on nuclear power on Channel 8, but you never can tell. Somebody might come in and expunge it. We spin and we toil, we work all day, sowing and reaping, we store goods away, so we can be dressed well on the day that we die. We dig and drill and waste what we find, break up the earth, leaving little behind, but we will grow lilies in the by and by. I want to point out that the sun shines down its power to all the world and makes the wind blow strong as it will. I want to hope gentle rains can fall upon the land so lovely earth can stay lovely still.